Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Footprint Farms in Jackson, Mississippi. My name is Bill Evans, and I work for the Up and Farms Group in Jackson. And we're very thankful today that MSU has invited us to be part of their extension presentation on high tunnels. And I'm going to speak to you today about variety selection and seed quality and things like that with high tunnels. Why is it important to take all the detail and thought about what we're going to grow in that tunnel rather than just planting what we have out in the field, we'll plant it in a tunnel? Well, there's a few things. One of the most important things from a business point of view is the value of these tunnels. If you think about it, these tunnels run these days about $10 a square foot. That means this tunnel is the second most valuable thing on your farm if you've got a house on the farm. If you don't have a house on the farm, this is as valuable as any building you have on the farm, any structure, and way more valuable than your fields. This tunnel, at $10 a square foot, there's 43,000 square feet in an acre, roughly. So that makes this tunnel worth about $430,000 an acre. So we have to plan it that way. We have to think about it. How can we generate revenue that represents that value? And since the tunnel is worth about 10 grand or so, we want to get that back as soon as we can. So we're going to think about varieties and crops that get that money back to us as soon as we can. And that's what we're going to talk about next. With the big box stores, I had a brother that worked for one of the big box stores. And his training, part of his training was you can't sell anything off an empty shelf. That's true of these tunnels. And whether you're growing in your tunnel in Mississippi or Florida or Maine or Ontario or anywhere else on the continent, you have to think about your seasonality and what you can grow and how many crops you can grow each year. And that plays into this whole crop selection thing too. Let's say you're growing in, Michigan. Well, Michigan has a relatively short growing season compared to where I am in Mississippi right now. In Michigan, you might only get one high tunnel crop a year if you're growing tomatoes. You might get two if you're growing lettuce and beets, say. So you have to think about that. Down here in Mississippi, which is most of my direct audience today, we can get 3 or 4 or sometimes even 5 high tunnel crops a year. And again, you can't sell anything, you can't return your value on the tunnel off an empty tunnel. So think about that as you plan your crops. Think about, well, if this crop takes 45 days to grow, what am I going to put in? What's the weather going to be like and the climate going to be like for the next crop that comes after that? Do I need to take a break in the summertime because it's just so hot that I can't cool my tunnel enough to grow anything in it that's going to make me money? A lot of growers do that in Mississippi. But you can grow in Mississippi. You could have a spring tomato crop that you planted in this tunnel, and I'm in Jackson again. We could plant in January or February. Plant in January with some extra heat and maybe some secondary covers. We can plant in February, certainly usually most years, without any secondary covers on those inside the tunnels. Then that tomato crop would finish sometime around now, maybe a little after June. We're at June 5th when I'm taping this right now. So maybe by June 15th or so, it's getting too hot in the tunnel and the tomatoes play out. Well, then what can I grow in the summertime? Well, maybe I come in and I have a pepper plant ready to go. I have pepper crops. Or maybe I have okra, which isn't a great high tunnel crop, but maybe that's what we do. Or maybe we come in with zinnias as a cut flower. And I'm going to talk about all of these more in depth in a few minutes. Then after that, let's say those play out on September 15th or October 15th. Well, then I can come in with a fall crop of greens or a fall crop of lettuce or herbs, or maybe I have a blend of different things in the tunnel at that time. So that's what I mean by seasonality. So we have to think about that. Now, let's talk about the value of the crops. What crops are good for high tunnels? What do we think? Well, it's high dollar space. It's worth dozens of pennies a day per square foot. I'll say that. That's kind of a weird way to say that, but we'll say that. So we want crops that are going to generate more pennies per square foot than the tunnel costs to grow in. That's the cost of the tunnel plus all the labor plus the opportunity cost of having the tunnel there and not doing something else with the land, all that stuff factors in. So we want crops for tunnels. I recommend, at least, that we have crops for tunnels that grow relatively quickly or have relatively high value per square foot per day. And what do I mean by that? Let's dig into that just slightly. With, let's say, a lettuce crop, if I transplant lettuce into this tunnel, or I transplant Swiss chard like was transplanted here, but let's take lettuce because it's a little shorter season. We'll talk about Swiss chard in a minute. If we had a lettuce crop, green lettuce would take about 45 days from the time I transplant it into this tunnel to the time that I can harvest it. 45. Red lettuce maybe 55 or 60 days, and then I can harvest it. And this is leaf lettuce, of course, that I'm talking about, not head lettuce. Head lettuce is challenging in Mississippi, and I don't recommend it for almost anyone in Mississippi to do at all. But the leaf lettuce, 45 days. Well, if I can get $3 a head for each of those lettuces, and each of them takes up 1 square foot, that's $3 per square foot in 45 days. Take 3 divided by 45, that's roughly 6 cents per square foot per day I'm generating in that time. That's a pretty high number. But now let's look at tomatoes. Tomatoes are probably the number one high tunnel crop, and they are for a reason. They're fairly easy to grow in a tunnel situation. They're suitable for high tunnels because they don't get as many diseases and insect damage as they do outside the tunnel, but we'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit also. But they're also very valuable in the marketplace. They're in demand almost all the time in almost every market for red or green salad or beefsteak sized tomatoes. Those nice 8 to 12 ounce tomatoes that we all like to buy at a farmer's market, or that chefs like to use. In that case, one tomato plant might take up 6 square feet in the tunnel. And if we can get it to generate, say, an average of 10 pounds of marketable fruit per plant, that's roughly a pound, we'll say a pound and a half per square foot over 75 days. But if I get $4 a pound, that's generating $6 per square foot over the 75 or 100 days. So again, we're at that 6, 7, 8, 10 cents a square foot kind of number when you run those numbers. And I went through that quickly. Contact me. My contact information is at the end of the presentation. And we can walk you through some of those numbers. But so tomatoes become a very valuable crop. And they're valuable in the marketplace. So that's why we do tomatoes. Now let's think about some stuff that generates even more money than lettuce or tomatoes per square foot. Let's talk about herbs. Now here's the deal with herbs. Herbs can generate 10 cents a square foot per day or more. But the demand for them is much lower than it is for tomatoes. I can grow 15,000 pounds of tomatoes in this tunnel in a year. I can probably grow 5,000 pounds worth of herbs in the tunnel in a year. Maybe 2, maybe 5, something like that. But there's no way in heck that I can sell 5,000 pounds worth of chervil or even basil. It's just, without being a big commercial grower and having big commercial accounts, it's very hard to drive that kind of money with herbs, that kind of volume with herbs. So herbs are great as part of your tunnel program, but not as the totality of it, unless that's where you want to specialize. And if you want to do that, we can all certainly talk about that. Now let's talk about another one that has the same kind of deals as herbs. The most valuable thing you can probably grow in a high tunnel is cut flowers. Before I joined Up in Farms, I worked for Mississippi State as a researcher down at Chard crops. And a wonderful scientist, new scientist at the time, and now a highly experienced and still wonderful scientist, Dr. Grihong B. and I, and another scientist, Dr. Gu, who's now at A&M in Texas, we did a study on cut flowers. And we, in half the size of this tunnel, we grew 10,000 stems of zinnias or zinnias. 10,000 stems in one half of the tunnel over the course of 5 months. That's 2,000 stems a month off of half of the tunnel at $1 or even $2 a stem at a farmer's market. That's $2,000 or $3,000 a month for 5 months off of half of this tunnel. Hugely valuable. But again, it's very hard to sell 10,000 stems of zinnias at a farmer's market. It's very hard. It's easy to sell 1,000 or 2,000 or even 3,000. You get up at that higher volume, and it's very hard to sell. So my recommendation on that is that we just go with small volumes of cut flowers or a mix of cut flowers, so that then we can do the bouquets and do the value added from that. Because the stems get even more value when you mix them with other flowers and you create a bouquet for the customer. Then you have 12 stems that are worth $30 instead of 12 stems that are worth $12 or $24. So different varieties perform differently in high tunnels, and we want to make sure that we choose varieties that are appropriate for the high tunnel and crops that are appropriate for the high tunnel. I'm standing here in a patch of 3 different kinds of leaf lettuce. There's actually a green butterhead, a red butterhead, and a green leaf lettuce, regular loose leaf lettuce. And these are all appropriate varieties for the high tunnel. And lettuce does really well in high tunnels. And each of these plants can be worth several dollars. So you can imagine in 45 days how much money can come out of something like this. We want to choose varieties that are good for high tunnels. We want to choose crops that are good for high tunnels. What are some of the crops that are good for high tunnels? We talked about tomatoes. Tomatoes are the #1 crop for tunnels. And there are indeterminate tomatoes that will grow all the way to the ceiling, that are suitable if you have a long season for your high tunnel tomatoes. Then there are determinate tomatoes, which I like for southern growers, where our tomato season in a high tunnel tends to be a little shorter, but we have 2 of them. We have a fall season that starts in August, and we have another season that starts in February going into the spring. So we get 2 4 to 5 month windows there. But we can't grow through the summertime in the tunnel because it's too hot, and the wintertime, except south of I-10, it just gets too cold in the wintertime to carry those tomatoes through the tunnel with high quality. So I like determinate tomatoes. Those are the kind that only grow 4 to 6 feet high. There's a lot of them around. Basically, almost any of the small stature, meaning small planted, field determinate tomatoes will grow in a tunnel. Even big beef, which is a relatively large framed tomato plant, it does really nicely in a high tunnel. But Amelia and Camaro and all the mountain series, they all do really well in high tunnels. And you can see that when you look at a catalog. You can see certain catalogs will recommend certain varieties for high tunnels. Those, you combine those with what your market needs, the size of the tomato, the color of the tomato, whether it's heirloom or heirloom-esque or just a straight flat tomato. All of those can be chosen. So, what can we learn from catalogs and extension publications and things like that? When I open, this is Johnny's again, when I open this and I look, there's just wonderful, simple charts and descriptions. Here's a general chart in this catalog of how lettuce grows. Here's some specific recommendations for varieties for early, mid, and late season. Here's a little germination guide. It says if you're going to grow the seeds from seed, what temperatures and the relative speed of the germination at various temperatures. They have that for every variety in here. They also have disease resistance. So if one of the varieties is resistant to a disease, you can come to this code here and see which one that is. And these codes are different for different crops. Okay, so then there's other parts of the lettuce section here. Let's see if I can go. So these varieties, like these are one-cut varieties here. These are designed for a simple one-cut for salad leaf lettuce that you might grow rather than a whole head. So it has 60 days to harvest. Remember, red lettuces take longer than greens. Here are the disease resistances, downy mildew, and a few others. Then it has a sexy description of what the variety is like here. Remember, this is a sales document, but it's also information. That's why I think these are really valuable. Then it has how much it is priced, and this one says it's pelleted seed. So that's that coding that I talked about that makes it easy to put a single seed in a single place. There are dozens and dozens of lettuce varieties in here. Dozens and dozens. But use this as the educational tool it is. Combine this knowledge with talking to the salesperson. These salespersons actually they're not going to be in business next year selling you seed if they steer you wrong. They know what your neighbors are growing. So I find them to be an extension of extension, if you will. I find them to be really valuable partners in my growing. I ask my salespeople what they recommend, and I've almost never been steered wrong. Almost never been steered wrong. It's great. Different catalogs are different ways, though. This one here has that sexy description that has practical stuff in it, but written in an attractive way. Then it also has the disease resistances. It has how long it takes to grow. It has some other notes in here about things. This catalog has here's resistances for spinach if you're going to grow spinach. So catalogs are really valuable. Here's a third catalog. This one here, I'm just going to open it very briefly for you here. This is a really relatively utilitarian commercial catalog. But all of these varieties here offer something to the commercial grower. They're really good stuff. So we talked about tomatoes, number one crop. We talked about lettuce, other greens. The Asian greens do really well in high tunnels. Tatsoi, bok choy, pak choy, all those do really well in high tunnels. Mizuna mustard. Arugula does really well in high tunnels. Swiss chard does really well. I'm not as big a fan of garden beets as I am of Swiss chard because I can transplant the Swiss chard and I get harvest after harvest relatively quickly. Within 30, 40 days I'm harvesting. Whereas the root of a beet, which is the exact same plant, would take so much longer to grow. Let's see. Summer squash, but not winter squash. Winter squash, too many vines, not enough fruit per square foot. Summer squash, crookneck squash, zucchini squash, all of those, even the fancy odd ones, they do really well in high tunnels and can have a really quick turnaround. Peppers do really well. Not as high a yield, not as much dollars per square foot as tomatoes, but really demandful in the market. And the high tunnel lends themselves to growing a nice high quality bell pepper, as well as good high quality spice peppers if you have a retail market for your spice peppers. Thank you very much for joining me today. Again, my name is Bill Evans with Upin Farms. My email is easy, bill@upinfarms, UPINFARMS.com. Bill@upinfarms.com. Contact me about anything we've said here today, and I'll join you in a few minutes for the live Q&A at the end of the session. Want to thank Upin Farms. Want to thank NRCS, who's helping me do some of these high tunnel trainings. Want to thank MDAC, that's helping fund MSU's work in this field. Want to thank Footprint Farms, who generously allowed us to use their setting today for the video. Thank you again, and we'll see you again soon.